Oh, okay. Now it's being recorded. So if you have bad things to say, just know that it will live on in posterity. This workshop is called Letting the Audience In. And I don't like to work with notes, but I want to really give you my best. So if I glance away, I do have paper with notes. And so bear with me there. There's all kinds of storytelling. First of all, who here is a storyteller? Raise your hand or say something.
I'm a
Who
bad
here,
storyteller.
and who here is a story listener primarily? And who here teaches storytelling? Oh God, all the critics are going to be here. Who here is a personal narrative storyteller? And who here, Eric, are you going to let people in or should I continue to let people in?
I'll let them in. I'll let them in.
And who tells folk tales and fairy tales and those kinds of things? Okay, this session, this workshop is about personal narrative storytelling. And that's the space in which I live as a storyteller. Some of you know me, some of you have performed with me, and I'm going to assume, don't make me laugh. I'm going to assume that nobody knows me, and I'm going to start from the beginning. My name is Howard Lieberman. I am soon to be 74 years old. I'm originally from Chicago. I currently live in Minnesota. I moved here after 20 years in New York City. I've lived in Montreal. I've lived in Winnipeg. I've lived in Paris. I've spent time in the north of England. I've traveled lots of places, and I speak a couple of languages. I'm pretty good in English. I'm pretty good in French. I know some Hebrew. I know some Yiddish. And I actually know some German because my grandmother was German. And although I can't speak it, when my wife and I went to Germany, she said, you know, Howard, people are talking to you in German and you're understanding them and you can't respond, but how do you know German? So that's who I am. And the storytelling that I do is personal narrative storytelling. And I consider myself a performer. I see storytelling as a performance art. And I know that there are others who do not. There are some who think that storytelling is just an exchange between people, but I perform. I have a theater background. My father was a tap dancer who got, you may not know this name, but he got his first pair of tap shoes from Mr. Bojangles, Bill Robinson. And I still have those tap shoes. And I've been on stage off and on since I was 14. My father was a really bad human being, so every now and then he left us when I was 9. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I realized in some ways I'm my father. It's my curse. So let's get started. That's enough about me for the time being. What's storytelling? What is storytelling? Again, it's an oral art form that allows, let me tell it, forget about notes for a second. When I was in the theater, it frustrated me. Theater is about an imaginary world on a stage. And the audience, they're voyeurs. They peek into this imaginary world, but they don't interact with it. I like interacting. And back around the year 2000, a dear friend by the name of Lauren Nemi, who has been telling stories, Moses told him a story, and then he's been telling stories ever since. And he said to me, you know, Howard, you're a storyteller. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm a performance artist. He would go, storyteller, performance artist, story. And then I thought about storytelling. What is it that I thought storytelling was. I thought it was like, you have the kids into the library and you tell them about the giant sunflower that goes all the way up to the sky and visits with the sun. And that wasn't me. But what I did discover is that storytelling is performance directed at the audience. When I tell a story, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. You don't need to peek into some imaginary world. Death of a salesman. When you see Death of a Salesman, they're not talking to you. They're telling their own little story, and you get to listen. And God forbid you try to participate, as my cell phone once did, watching Death of a Salesman in New York City. And so once I let Lauren convince me to be a storyteller, I've been a storyteller ever since. And I've had solo shows. I've been in slams. I've been in, I just, wherever someone will pay me, I perform. And even when people don't pay me, I perform as well. Does anybody here want to be a storytelling performer? Does that appeal to you? Could you see, well, I know about you, but could you see yourself getting on stage in front of 10,000 people? 10,000 people. And telling a story and performing a story and taking the audience's heart and soul and bringing it to yourself and taking your heart and soul and giving it back to them. I've never performed in front of 10,000 people, just so you know. I think 300 was my largest audience. That was breathtaking. That's what I like. And that's what we're going to touch on today. Performance. Storytelling as performance. Again, I'm a personal narrative storyteller. For the people who live in the US, you know what that means, I believe. But just to recap for everybody, and I apologize for looking at notes, but I don't really want to cheat anybody out of anything. Personal narrative stories, what are they? These are true stories. Truth is kind of a flexible concept. If 5 people see an auto accident and you ask them to describe what they saw, you'll probably get 5 different answers. And so when you tell a personal narrative story about something that happened to in your life, even yesterday, but maybe even 20, 30, in my case, 50, 60 years ago, right? I try to remember what actually happened. I talk about a time I used to be a printing press operator in Montreal, and I talked to the owner of the business, and these were the things I said to him. Well, I don't remember if that's exactly what I said, but that's what I think I said. And so to me, a personal narrative story is a story drawn from your life. And it's told as accurately as you remember it to be, but understanding that it's performance art. So if there's a little fudge in there, I mean, who doesn't like a little fudge for dessert? Am I right? So if there's a little fudge in there, that's okay. This is not the confessional. If there's a Catholic here, I don't know if anybody's Catholic. I'm Jewish. We don't have confessionals. But if there's any Catholics, it's not like you're in confessional and you have to say, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, and this is what I did," and you have to tell the truth. At least that's what I've been told by my Catholic friends. So it's performance. You try to be accurate within the story. And now there are different types of personal narrative stories. There are the long form stories, which is what I love. I did a 2.5-hour storytelling performance at the local Jewish community center and I had an audience, probably about 300 or 400 people. I love that. You have people in the palm of your hands. You take them where you want them to go, and it's all based on what? Why do I tell personal narrative stories? Is it therapy? If I want therapy, Eric can, I can do therapy with Eric. I don't need to use my art form as therapy. What is it? What is it that I do? What is personal narrative stories? I tell stories. Let me back up a little bit. I had a really, really terrible childhood. Um, it was bad. Don't give me that face. It was really bad. I can see you. My father left us when I was 9. My mother died when I was 14. I was shuttled around from different home to different home until the last home said, put everything I owned in a box, stapled a letter on it, and said, we don't want you here anymore. Here's everything we think you own. Don't ever come back. You're never going to be welcome here again, which led to me being homeless. I was homeless. You look at me and go, him? He was homeless? Yeah, I was homeless. And the reason I've been to all these places is because I was homeless. Okay, so now I've got these stories. I remember walking into the hospital when a doctor came out and told me my mother was dead. That's horrible. I mean, I could tell it, and I promise you, most of you would start crying. And if you didn't, you have no soul. But what's the point of my telling you that story? What's the point of telling you that I'm homeless? I'm not anymore. I'm married, I have 2 grandkids, and I live in a house in Minnesota. But what's my point when I tell you that I was homeless? If it's just to say, hey, I was homeless, woe is me, cry about my background, then it's a waste. To me, the best, and for me, the only personal narrative stories that I will tell are stories that allow the listener to use my life as a window to the outside world, to people who are not like you, perhaps, to gain empathy for people who are unhoused, for people, if I'm a white, and trust me, I couldn't be any whiter than I am right now, a white professional. I am a retired attorney. That's not very interesting. But if I tell a story about my being homeless and how I lost that sense of humbleness and how I spent the night with a homeless man on the streets of San Francisco, and I share my own experiences, what I'm hoping you'll gain is a better understanding of what it is like to be homeless and why that matters. Now, if I tell you some of these stories, they're a little intense. I have been to places, I've done things that I hope none of you ever, none of those places are places you visit, and none of those things that I did are things that you do. But they might be. But if I just tell you these grim, horrible stories, you probably leave the theater screaming or totally depressed. So I try to bring in humor, to the extent I have some humor there, some pathos, and I want to, again, use my life. I tried to kill myself once too, by the way. Just might as well throw that all out there. I failed, but obviously. But if I just tell you a story about how I once tried to kill myself, you go, well, that was just god-awful depressing. Why is he telling me that story? If I tell it in a way that allows you to gain some empathy for people who may have at some point tried to or contemplated taking their own lives, then you go, oh, now I understand those people better. The situations in which they find themselves feeling despondent. That's the purpose of my telling stories. Now, in addition to the long form of the personal narrative story, there's what we call slam storytelling, moth style storytelling. And I don't think you have those kind of moths in India, but it's you get 5 minutes to tell a personal narrative story, and if you get the drunken audience to laugh a lot, they give you big scores and you win. You go on to the grand slams, and maybe someday you'll be famous as someone who can tell a fairly meaningless but humorous story and make people laugh. And but it's legitimate, and that's a very active and growing school of storytelling. The 5 minute, got to have punch, got to have pathos, and don't go very deep, because the people 5 beers into the evening will lose their train of thought. It's not what I do. And then there's the hybrids. I did a show, I think about half an hour, based out of DC recently. I made some money on it. Wonderful to make money. And that's somewhere between the long form solo show and the punchy 5 minute moth. All of that's legitimate, by the way. I put down the moth and the 5 minute storytelling, make the audience laugh kind of thing. But if that's what you're into, I'm not here to tell you if that's wrong. It's not what I'm going to talk about. You know, there are some storytellers who don't see, and in fact, very much do not like the concept that storytelling is a performance art. And I think that some of the people who've actually done workshops as part of Eric's magnificent storytelling festival believe that very much. And that's just not who I am. And think about it for a minute. If you tell stories, you're performing anyway, no matter what you do. If you start to tell a story, there's a performance element to it. And if you're going to be on some level performing, why not accept it as a performance art and a storyteller as a performer? That's not a bad word. And so before we delve and get into any stories, I got some stories to tell, and I want you to tell me some stories. I'm going to start with how you should look when you're telling stories, if you're doing it as a performance art. Look at me. Can you see me a little bit? This is how I normally dress since the pandemic started here. I've got my summer weight hoodies, my winter weight hoodies. I've got some vests. And I know that performers, especially with the advent of Zoom, they just, you don't even know if I have pants on, trousers. I might just have my sweatpants on. I might be standing here in my unmentionables, but I'm not. But I don't like to go on stage, even if it's on Zoom, looking like somebody who just came in off the street. And I'm not going to do a big clothing change, but I want to not just say, I want to show a little bit. Respect your audience, whether you tell folk tales, whether you tell fairy tales to children in a library, whether you tell personal narrative stories. Don't look like a bum who walked in off the street. You're a performer. Respect that. And so you can't see this, but I even have a pocket square just to look a little spiffy. And what's another thing that I do? I'm as white a person, I said this earlier, as you could ever imagine. I give new meaning to, oh, he's a white guy. And I'm a bald white guy, so there's a lot of white showing. I put a little makeup on. I wear makeup on stage. Why would I not want to show myself at my best? You don't know it now, but I put something on just to make my cheeks stand out. Give me a little bit of color, because I'm making a presentation to you. You're my audience, each one of you who I can see. And so the first thing, if you decide to be a storyteller, a real storyteller who stands up in front of people, respect those people. Now, I generally won't get on stage wearing any jewelry whatsoever. I used to wear all these rings and all this other stuff, but I don't know about you, When I wear jewelry, I fuss. I fuss. Um, I sometimes, just to remind myself that I'm still alive. I used to fiddle with my wedding ring and do all these other things. Before I get on stage, all that comes off, because I want to be focused on you, each and every one of you. I don't want to be fiddling with the little tchotchkes, the little things that we have with us. So I do that. And so then you say, okay, so what is this really about? What's the difference between telling a story and performing a story? Let me give you just a short example. When I was in high school in Chicago, I had a good friend. His name is Kevin McMahon, and he was a bad kid. He lived in a home for delinquent boys, but they went to our school. He was also very smart, and he was in all the honors classes with me. And I'd see Kevin coming and I would go, now what's he going to say? Now what's he going to do? I mean, to confession, we got caught playing craps behind the school, and I got suspended with Kevin. The first time I took drugs, and I hope I don't offend anybody when I say that, it was illegal then, and I got suspended for that. He did a lot of bad things, and over time, Kevin and I, we drifted apart. I got involved politically, and I'm still very involved politically. And the last time I saw him, he was with the National Guard, and I was sort of on the other side of the National Guard back in at a demonstration in Chicago. And then I left it. And then I left it. And no, I'm gonna say no to Eric on that. And I'll do it my way. Eric's giving me little cues he wants me to follow. I first of all, that's distracting, and second of all, I do it my way. Sorry. Anyway, the last time I really saw Kevin, I saw his name etched in the Vietnam War Memorial in DC, and it was kind of a sad event, and I'll always remember Kevin. He was a good guy. The end. That's a nice story. Now let me tell it a different way. You don't mind if I use naughty words every now and then, do you? I hope not. Well, about next.
I try to keep it like 5 out of 10.
5 out of 10. Okay.
Yeah, like not too much.
Okay, we'll make it 3
You
out of 10.
you asked. You asked if we
And I wanted, and I appreciate that. I wanted an honest answer. I don't ask. If you don't ask,
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask, you got to listen, right? I'm
Yeah.
gonna tell a story. The same story. Kevin McMahon was a mess up. I mean, a screw of the highest order. But Kevin was my friend, and I loved him. I loved him dearly. Kevin was the kid who taught me how to play craps. I mean, how to you blow on the dice before you throw them. And we would play craps behind the school every day. He took my money, but I learned. But I learned from Kevin. One day, Mr. Myron, who was a very short man with a big ego, he was our assistant principal. I'm playing craps with Kevin. I'm doing that roll the dice. Here we go. And Kevin's eyes get wide. I'm going, uh-oh, what's going on? He does. I feel a tap on my shoulder. It's Mr. Myron. He said, you two into my office right now. Long story short, there, we got suspended. We laughed. We did some narcotics afterwards to feel better about ourselves. But one day I was in biology lab, and Kevin got up when the professor went out and locked the door to the lab. I think the professor had to go to the men's room while we were dissecting frogs. Icky, you cut them open and I don't recommend it. And I hear a on the door. And the professor goes, and we all go. It goes on like that until the police come and unlock the door and let the professor in. He storms in. He said, "Who did this?" We all sat there like, oh. We all knew who it was. He said, "McMahon, is that you?" We all looked. Kevin opened the window on the third floor and climbed on the window ledge. And the professor said, "Come in here, come in here, come in here." And Kevin looked at him and went, this went on and on. Until finally the fire department came, put a net underneath, and Kevin went, whee! His blonde, long blonde, beautiful blonde hair, oh, guy was gorgeous, flew up in the air, and he landed in a net. And that was kind of Kevin McMahon. But what really makes me love him is when my mother died. I went back to school and I was standing in the hallway under a clock. I could hear it go tick, tick, tick. And tears were streaming down my face. When you're an orphan, it's kind of like when you've got cancer, and I've had cancer. People don't want to talk with you. Like maybe being an orphan or having cancer is contagious. Or maybe, to be polite, they don't know what to say. Gee, I'm sorry you've got cancer, or gee, I'm glad you're an orphan. I'm by myself. Nobody will come near me. And they'll look down the hall. And who comes running towards me? Blonde hair, bright blue eyes, coming directly at me. He puts his arms around me. He gives me a big kiss on the lips. Now, I had never been kissed or kissed anyone before. To call myself a virgin was an understatement. I was never tasted lips of another person. He kissed me on the lips. He said, "I loved you, Howie. I'll go to class." And I did. And as happens in high school, we drifted apart. I graduated. Lord knows what happened to Kevin. And I was staying somewhere. I don't remember because, as I said, I was homeless and orphan, where do you go? But there was something called the Democratic Party Convention in the city of Chicago. It's where the parties have these conventions where they nominate someone to run for office. The Republicans, who I hate, the Republicans have theirs, the Democrats have theirs, and it's a big deal. Well, in 1968, it was a big, big, big deal. Tens of thousands of radical, long-haired, drug-taking hippie types converged on Chicago. Maybe even a guy like Eric, who knows, to protest the war in Vietnam. And I was one of those. I marched. You'll see my picture in books, you really will. Arm in arm with Allen Ginsberg and Rennie Davis. And I had a beard. I, believe it or not, had a ponytail. And we marched and we fled from the police. We did all. I mean, it was, as they say in the history books, a police riot. In any event, I'm listening to Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer is a relatively famous author who eventually ran for mayor of New York, actually. And he was a very controversial author, and he was speaking to the ground. He was a left-wing author, and I was a left-wing kid. And so I was listening. And then on one side, the police with batons like this. This is Chicago, they do that. With the batons like that, moving in from the left. The National Guard with guns, with bayonets, those big knife things on top, on the other side. And I'm sitting there. I need to tell you, I'm a coward at heart. I don't run towards violence.
You can ask me to play a radio station or ask for your music on a different app.
That's why you turn things off. I'm a coward. I don't run to violence. I don't say, let's go get those cops. Let's go. I froze. I'm looking at the stage. Police doing National Guard like this. And I look at the National Guard, and one of the guardsmen takes his helmet off. I see blonde hair. I see blue eyes. And I look over, and I mouth the word, Kevin? He looks back at me, and he mouths the word, Howie? We look into each other's eyes, and we both smile. It's my Kevin. That's my boy Kevin. Suddenly, someone very serious who is in charge walks over to the troops and yells at Kevin. And everybody puts on their helmets, grabs those rifles with the bayonets, the ones that stab you and then you're dead. Kevin looks at me one last time. I look at Kevin one last time. And he mouths the words, Howie, I love you. Now go to class. They charge, the police charge. I run. Those are the last words I ever spoke to Kevin. I lost track. I mean, you lose track of people, and I really lost track of Kevin. And one summer, maybe, I'm getting old, 20 years ago, my wife and I, we went to DC to show our daughter what this great nation's capital looks like. And I said, I want to see the war memorial, the Vietnam War memorial. And when we got there, it's a big, long wall, huge, long wall with all these names engraved on the wall. A tear ran down my face. I knew Kevin would be on that wall. And I walked and walked until I got to the M's. Gosh darn that Kevin, just like him. His name was all the way on the bottom, and I had to get on my knees. And I looked and I touched. I felt his name. And I kissed his name. And I said, Kevin, I love you. Now go to class. I told the same story twice. One was a story. I had a friend named Kevin. He was a screw up. We did this, we did that, and blah, 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 blah. That's storytelling. But story performance was what I did the second time. Same story, same characters, same Kevin. That's what I'm trying to get at with what we're working on today. There is a difference between just, and I don't say that as negatively as that sounds, but just being a storyteller and being a story performer, performance artist. and I am that. And so I have notes, as I said, I'm pretty much ignoring the notes because I have this all in my head anyway. But do you see how the first story was? It was a nice story. It was, blah, blah, blah. But when I performed the story, I used gestures. I pause. When you tell a difficult story, you pause. You pause for effect. Let's be honest. You want the audience to go, I want more. I want more. But you also pause to let the audience into the story. You want them to be there with you. And if you just talk like, oh, then I met Kevin and, he's National Guard, I was a lefty and never saw him again until the Vietnam War. Well, that's okay. And you might, maybe that's how I would tell it to my daughter, well, my granddaughter. And to me, that's not performance art. I mean, am I being clear with regard to what I'm trying to get at?
Howard, can I ask?
I'm sorry?
Majid, can I ask a question?
Anytime.
Can I ask you a question about what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Oh, I love what you're saying, and thank you for both stories, and thank you for your activism work when you did it. I would like to learn how to do pauses. When you started doing the performance part of the storytelling, this genre, was it easy to check on yourself? Look, I'm gonna pause. How did you coach yourself to pause?
That's a good question, and thank you for asking that. There are different types of storytellers. Let me get there. I'm a storyteller, so I have to get there my own way. Some storytellers read their stories. In Minnesota, they like to have music stands, and they read the story and they do that. Then they go look at the audience, they read the story, and. That's not storytelling. That's reading. I'm an author. If you'd like me to read from the first novel I wrote, I'd be happy to do that. But that's not storytelling. That's certainly not story performance. Some people memorize their stories. There's a brilliant teller in Minnesota. I've heard him tell the same story 3 or 4 times. He pauses at exactly the same places. He uses it. He does it well. He does it really well, but it's static. This takes me a little bit further back. It's a very good question because I'm going to answer it eventually. Takes me back somewhere else in my notes. I don't know. To me, a story lives, you can't see me. A story lives right here. It lives in my heart. It lives in my soul. And if I can't tell a story without reading it, without memorizing it, without pausing the same place I paused the last 6 times I told that story, you're not storytelling. You're in many ways, you're like what I used to be in the theater. You're creating this imaginary world and you're letting the voyeurs peek at it, but you're not connecting. And so the question is, how do I know where to pause? I am what I would call an extemporaneous storyteller. Do I write out my stories? Yeah, I do. I'm also a writer. I never take notes up with me. I never read. I tell stories from my heart and soul. And I'm trained enough to know. I was trained in theater. I know when a pause might make sense, but I'm also playing off the audience. If they're all looking at me like, God, I can't take this guy anymore. Let me leave the room. I know right then I better pause and figure out, move in a different direction. So I know how I'm going to open every story. it's like being a trial lawyer. You know how you're going to open your case. You want the jury to begin to see the story the way you want to tell it. I know how I want to close the case. I want them to hear my voice and hear how I perceive the facts underlying the matter in contest, not to sound like a lawyer. But in the middle, I improv a little bit. I'm a jazz musician. If you just play the notes straight and you don't bring any heart and soul and you don't improvise, you could be a very gifted musician. But to me, that's not artistry. And so when do I pause? Manji, when do I pause? When it feels in my heart and in my soul. I need to pause. And the next time you hear me tell that story, you might think, well, you didn't pause it when I saw it the first time. And you know what? I probably didn't. And some of the stuff, I mean, it's not the first time I've told the Kevin McMahon story. I've told it probably 100 times. Did I pause the same places? Did I tell the same little things that we got in trouble for doing? Did I tell you that Kevin pulled his hair out by the roots when he was really stressed? Or that he lived in a home because he too was an orphan, but this were for kids who were bad boys? No, but I might have, next time you hear it, that might be in there. Depends how much time I've got. It depends how I feel. I have a trouble with acid reflux. I'm Jewish. We always have, all of us have trouble with acid reflux. Don't give me that look. And I might pause because at that particular moment, I'm going, oh, I don't need reflux right now. Let me just take a breath and keep going. Does that make any sense to you? Did I answer your question? And so, the little side note, this is not in any of my notes here. I did a show in Chicago about 6 months ago. And if we have time later, if you want me to, I'll share that story. It's about my connecting with a homeless man on streets of San Francisco and realizing that I had gone from being a homeless, orphan, abused kid to being an arrogant, overpaid, fancy-dancy, I only fly first class corporate attorney. It really is a profound story, and I love it. My brother was in the audience, and at the end of the story, it gets really emotional. I mean, I made a promise to that boy, being me, that I would always devote my blah, blah, blah. So my brother afterwards said, I've seen some storytellers and you're performing. Is that storytelling? I mean, the other people just tell a story, but you're performing. Yes, I am performing. I believe that if you're doing, even if you're doing, fairy tales or folk tales, I could tell old Jewish folk tales. And I think some people here have heard me tell one. And I can pause. I can animate. If I just tell a story about this guy who plays this instrument and who is he anyway? That's one thing, but even if you're a folktale teller, and I know some of you are, many of you are, be a performer. So I've done a lot of talking, and I don't know if this will shock you. I could probably talk for 2 more hours without taking a break, and that would be easy for me, and I would like it. And the 3 of you who are still on this Zoom at the end of it, I would thank you for that. But I'd like to see a couple of volunteers. Eric wanted to know if we were going to go into breakout rooms. I'm not a fan of breakout rooms. That's just me. So be that as it may. Who knows a story, a shortish story, a Kevin McMahonish story, would like to tell a story 2 ways? Tell it perfunctorily, or let me be polite. Tell it just like, we're having dinner. Hey, Ma, guess what I did today at school? And perform it. And I'll spotlight you if I can remember how to do that.
I can go.
Okay.
So I was gonna ask how to perform because I've never performed. So I was gonna ask if we tape ourselves, if we ask our family to be the audience. So I'll just do it, performing for you guys while I'm learning to do it. Okay. So
Yeah,
the first
go
version
ahead.
is I'm 61. I'm in college again. It's gonna be my first time graduating. I've tried to graduate several times, but this time I will graduate in May. I mentioned to kids that I was for a while during the pandemic that I was in school, and they looked at me like old people go to school. So I had to like get find something interesting to tell them. I told them, and you know, one of my classmates has a snake, and her name is Maggie. Okay, so that's the first version.
Okay.
Okay, now you said to go here in the belly, go to emotion, and do the pausing stuff.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Majda, and I'm 61. It's not easy for me to come from a family where everyone has a college degree and I don't. Well, this time I think it's going to work. I found out that my college has a disability resource center and I get a time and a half to do my tasks. This time, I think I'm going to be able to graduate this May. Well, while I was doing my college courses online during the pandemic, I had to find a way to make some money to pay my bills. I found two kids, I found a family that wanted a babysitter. And I had a great time for almost 2 years being a babysitter, telling stories, going on adventures. When I stopped being the babysitter, I didn't see them for quite 2 years. And recently, last week, I saw them at the library and we reconnected and they remembered me. And then when I was saying goodbye to them, I told them I don't know how it came up. I told them I was in school as well. And they looked at me like, really? Do old people go to school? And the fun way of having them believe that I really was in school was when I told them that one of my classmates has a snake, and the snake's name is Maggie. But let me tell you guys, the thing about going to school and finding a friend and learning that she has a pet snake, this has been a blessing because I've been sick and tired of being inside with now I'm back in school and making friends with people who have pet snakes.
Yeah. Najee, you're a very brave woman. We don't know each other. I don't know if you know anybody else in this room. You said, I'm going to try this. And I want to, before anything, tell you how much I admire that. It takes a lot of courage. So thank you for that. Um, did you, when you, what did people think? Well, let me start because I'm a big mouth. When, when you started on the performance, when you started as a performance piece, your eyes got bigger. Your face lit up. You were seeing yourself back then, and you took us there with you. If we're working on the story, I would tell you maybe the introduction could be a little stronger. Maybe the close could be a little stronger about snakes. Maybe a boa I don't know, a big snake. Maybe you used to be afraid of snakes. Maybe snakes give you kind of like, ugh. But the way you told it the second time, again, I would ask other people, and everybody's going to be polite and say, I agree with you. But did you see how much more alive Meja's face was. And did it draw you more into the story? And you can say no and say, quiet old man, whatever you want to say.
The end when she's mentioned why this was so important, the snake, the friend with the snake, that was something that brought it together for me. And but yes, the difference was so obvious, and you kept me with the story the second time.
And it was the same story, but you're right. The second story was like the second time she told the story. I was really with her. I could. It was wonderful. I enjoyed that so much more. What do other people think? Or even you can, if you feel more comfortable critiquing me as opposed to a very brave woman who went first, that's okay too. Is what I'm saying making sense? Why?
Can I say something real quick?
Of course.
I could tell when the audience was more, I mean, I'd be wrong, but even if we were on Zoom, there was this energy where I could feel more the audience closer to me, and sometimes I'm noticing a shift. So, like you mentioned before, we can do some, how can I say, I had a connection with you guys, even though we're in different parts of the world. I felt something, and I felt when not that I had to change my story, but I wanted to like get closer to you, so that influenced my energy in looking for my heart. I said, no, every time I felt the audience going a little bit away, I wanted to come closer to my heart for my story to be more alive. Make sense?
Thank you. That's how I felt listening as an audience. Now, Daisy, did you have your hand raised? I saw a hand go up, an electronic hand.
Yeah, I enjoyed what Margie said. Performing what she said was much more interesting than when she did not perform. And she came alive. She was living the scene all over again. Thank you, Margie.
What does anybody else think? Selena, you're an opinionated woman living in Montreal. For God's sake, say something.
Well, I
My
mean,
daughter.
I mean, one was just really like conversational and just very detail oriented, and it was fine. But the second time, I mean, like you say, she put her heart and her soul into it, and it became a creative piece, which is really what performance is.
Right.
I didn't mean to put you on. Oh, yes, I did mean to put you on the spot.
That's
So
okay. My mom is sitting beside me, and she's agreeing all the way through, and she knows nothing about storytelling.
Hi,
Oh, come
Mom.
on. I've been telling you
Oh.
stories since the day you were born.
See, there you go.
I was
Which
thinking.
I have a bias, and I have sort of thrown my bias at you. But as people who tell stories, or Mom who listens to stories too, if you want to disagree with me and say, you know what, Howard, there's theatricalization and there's storytelling. You're not a storyteller. You're an actor. I mean, I can hear you. I like people who disagree with me. That's okay.
So it's interesting that you say you're an actor, and I know nothing about acting. And yet when I tell stories and I call myself a storyteller, people who are storytellers say that I'm a performer. So, I think that I think that there are just two different camps. And I think that you do come from a performer or a performative style. As I think do I, even though I know nothing about performance. But there are people who can literally stand there and tell you a story, and you will follow that story and they do not need to put in any more than that. And it's through their words, and it just proceeds. So I think there's just many different storytellers, if you
Yeah,
ask
sure.
me.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very good comment.
And-
Faye, is that your hand?
I think also, I mean, from when listening to yours, Howard, it's a matter of scripting as well. It's not just the pauses, it's the things you've chosen to tell. It's your pacing, and you've got an arc, like there's some kind of you're talking about your relationship with him, your love for him, and that plays out all the way through the story, and that the story ends that way too, with a very heartfelt moment where you're totally expressing your love for your friend who has now died. And so I think it's both the performance techniques, but it's also very much the scripting and the creating that beautiful story arc that's, to me, is important.
Did I over theatricalize it? Did you say, oh, he's not a storyteller?
No. I mean, I'm also probably more towards the performance end. I mean, I work hard on my stories before I tell them. I tend
Sure.
not to be super spontaneous I mean, I love to improvise within a story, but I like to know my beginning and my end, like you say, and yeah, and maybe don't get all the details that I've thought through, but I figure out the arc, and I think that's an important part.
And Faye will tell you, probably she agrees with me. So you've had one or two or three really interesting details, and about 5 minutes after you're done, you go, I left that out. That would have really helped a lot. That happens. That happens. Sudha, you have your hand up. Thank you.
I've just joined a little late, so forgive me if this question has already been answered. What are the major differences between storytelling and acting?
Or story performances, I call it. I don't know the answer to that question, but I will tell you how I perceive it. When you act, a good actor knows when they get on stage, they're off book. Off book means they know their lines, they've rehearsed, they know where they're going to pause, they know where they've got it blocked out. Okay, at this point, I say these words and I go downstage center. At which point, if it's not a solo show, someone comes in from the other side and you interact as realistically as you can because it's all scripted, but whereas storytelling is, from my perspective, is even if you're I'm a closed-minded person. For me, story performance, it's not necessarily acting. It's making a story come alive so that you're interacting as the storyteller with the people here. I can look in someone's eyes, Maji's eyes, and I can see Maji's eyes. I can see your eyes, Sudha, and we're interacting, all of us, one-on-one. And there are some storytellers who don't like that. There are some storytellers who think that Howard Lieberman's style is, put him in a nightclub or something like that. It's not storytelling. There are, as I think Selena said, there's all kinds of storytellers, storytelling styles. They're all legitimate. I mean, that's saying that that friend of mine actually in Minnesota who memorizes his stories and tells them word for word always the same way with the same inflections and stuff. He knows I feel that way because we've talked about it, but that doesn't mean I don't think he's a good storyteller. He's a very good storyteller and probably gets more local gigs than I get because he's easier to deal with. I'm this emotional, whatever. But I mean, am I answering your question? Am I speaking to your question?
Yes. I think there's a whole gamut of things that we can't possibly cover. So I think, would it be safe to say that you can do whatever you feel comfortable doing? If you want to tell because that's important, right?
Sudha, if you're going to be part of this art form, it's because you love it. And however you love it is okay. And can you do it this way versus that way? Well, if there's people who want you to do it that way, fine. If you do it that way and nobody ever comes to a performance or a show you do, then maybe you have to think about how else to do it. But I am in no way meaning to say that my way is the only way. I'm trying to say that it's a spectrum, and storytellers are, the little old ladies in the library with the kids on the knee and the giant sunflowers and la la la. And then there's the people on sort of that side, which is kind of where I live, who are a little more gripping, shall we say.
Thank you very
And
much, Howard.
very
That
quickly, Barry,
helps.
if you look in the chat, Barry Stewart, who's a friend, has a really nice little tidbit. But now moving on. Shukrita, you have a question. Your hand is raised.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just say that I loved the whole difference between just the normal storytelling and the performance storytelling. And I felt that it is because as a storyteller, I would love to take my audience on a journey and, to take the audience into your journey, into your world. It was so interesting how you did it with the performance storytelling, which was so natural. It was it was not overdone, and the words, the pauses and the words just danced out. They come alive, and when they come alive and they evoke something within me, when I hear you, it is something that resonates, and there's something that just stirs within. And like you said, that storytelling is from the heart, and I completely agree. And the very fact that you said that you've said the story a million times, but every time you could pause at a different place, you could describe a little more or less and keep it so flow, in a different flow every time. It's beautiful. And the imagery is interesting, that the imagery sticks with you. So I can, what you said, about your friend and about your relationship so beautifully, it is something I'll never forget. So if you want something to stick and you want something to resonate, I think this is a beautiful medium of doing it. And thank you for that. Thank you for that. It was really brilliant.
Oh, well, no, thank you for being here and listening to me. To me, that's brilliant. I appreciate that. Because, my wife doesn't want to hear me talk to her anymore about things like this. She just said she'll turn the volume on the TV louder, and that's what that'll be. Now, Sudha, did you raise your hand again? I can't tell.
No, I didn't. I didn't.
Do you know how to take your hand down? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
You'll figure. Sumaya, did you have your, okay.
Yeah, I put it on the chat also, but I just thought I'll share with you. One of my challenges is when I'm with the family or friends and somebody will say, just tell me a story, tell us a story. And then I have this difficulty of transitioning from, it's to become that performer in that space. So are there any tips for that? How do you do that? I'm just I get lost, and most of the time saying, no, we'll see, you come later, I'll tell you a story. I'm doing that quite often.
You ask a very good question for which I have no particularly good answer. When I get together with family on my wife's side, because I don't really have family on my other side, they often say things like, so tell a story, or what do you do, Howard? What's your art? And I say, well, I'm a storyteller. And they go, what does that mean? You work in a library? And, we have this, well, tell us a story anyway. Okay, tell us a story. At that point, my reaction is, I think I'm going to get up, walk out of the room, get in the car and drive away. I can't think of anything I'd rather do less than tell a story to my in-laws. They would just have no idea what I do. And it'll be like, people pay you for that? And I'll say not enough, but they do, yeah. And then you start to tell people, well, my brother-in-law Richie's a lawyer. I said, Richie, you don't think lawyering is a storytelling art? when you go into a courtroom, if you don't know how to tell a story, guess who's not going to win? You. And guess who's going to win? The person who does know how to tell a story. I mean, I had clients, because after a while I was a consultant to attorneys and law firms who would represent automobile companies and products liability suits, meaning people got into accidents, people died, kids were mangled, and they were suing Ford and GM. And if they can't tell a story, they'll lose every time. Because the plaintiff's attorney has, they'll have little coffins on the, in the next to the them in the box, and they'll do everything they can to tell a story. If you go for a job interview, anybody here ever go for a job interview? It really helps if you know storytelling. I have an education, and I'm pretty good at what I do, and I hope you like me. Well, you're not going to hire me, so you're telling stories. If you're out later than you told your spouse or partner, and you come in at 2 a.m. instead of 9 p.m., you're a storyteller. You're a storyteller, a little bit. You're not going to tell outright lies, because why would you lie to your spouse or partner? I would never do that. I can't speak for the rest of you, but you're a storyteller, and that's okay. And now, if you're too theatrical with your spouse, he or she or they will probably hit you upside the head and tell you to sleep in the other room. And I know it's not a very comfortable bed, because I've been there. But so, I mean, storytelling, when your family says, tell us a story, take a deep breath, understand they don't understand what you do, or they dismiss it as just, oh, maybe someday she'll grow out of it, and do what you do. And don't think about it too much. Don't over theatricalize. They don't want to see that. Don't use naughty words, but that's what you do. And I wish you good luck. If your parents want to ask me questions, they can call me. I can give you my phone number. Oh no, that's what she does. Anyway, I'm waxing. Jeff the Bard, what do you think about the price of peas in Paris?
I have no idea about the price of peas in Paris, but I'm a story performer, and I never really thought of it in that. I just assumed all storytellers were performers. It's often said anybody can tell a story, but not everybody can be a storyteller.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could be a storyteller without performing. Now, I treat every story the same. And like, if my family asks me to tell a story, or friends, I tell a story the same way, whether I have an audience of 1 or I have an audience of 300. I treat every story I tell the exact same way, and I tell it. Well, I never tell a story the same way twice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could.
But
Memorizing a story.
You know how you're going to open and close, and where they
I know how I'm going to open and close, but I feel my audience. You catch the eyes, you look at the people in the story. I was taught, because I come out of a traditional form, I was taught trained actually as a Celtic bard. I was taught that I'm a vehicle for the story. You open yourself up and let the story tell itself through you. All you are is the vehicle that the story is actually manifesting through. And I found in many cases that's actually true. If you just open yourself up, people tend to think too hard about it. They don't just, storytelling is a Zen thing. You do it, you feel it, you don't think about it. If you think about it, it's not going to work, and people are going to know it's not.
Very well said. I really appreciate that.
A good storyteller is the ultimate wizard. When we do a story, and we do a story well, that's what real magic is.
Mm-hmm.
You have transported somebody to another place, another time, another existence, and made them feel like it's theirs. That's what magic is. And that's what, as storytellers, our goal should always be whenever we tell a story, is to make magic.
Well said. I appreciate that. And you're a Shanachie, and I appreciate you as a Shanachie. And by the way, a little side note, I used to be the artistic director of the Irish Art Center in New York City and used to teach traditional Irish dancing. And even when
I
you're
do that
teaching, okay, we should get to know each other. But anyway, another time. Go ahead, Karen. I have to look your name. I know who you are. Go ahead, Karen.
So I just want to comment on what Jeff the Bard said. I fall into that same category. It frequently gets me into trouble in my family because I actually got my start as a storyteller at the dinner table, being the sixth of 6 children. The only way I could get airtime was at my table when I was a kid. That's how I started. But it gets me in trouble with my family now because my kids and my husband, they say, I don't remember it that way. You're just telling a story. That's
Right.
not the way it was. And I say, everyone has a different perspective. And this is my perspective because what I learned from this experience is what I'm telling you in this story. I'm not in a court of law where I have to tell you the details, or I'm not in the doctor's office where I have to explain it in that way. Even in my own family, I will tell a story that makes a better story, even if my family says, I don't remember it that way. You're stretching the truth, and I can't do it differently. It is who I am. I live and breathe story in the fabric of my life, my day to day. When I'm on the stage, I'm a performance storyteller. When I'm with kids, when I'm on the bus, when I'm on an airplane, talking to a total stranger, that's the best, because then you can talk about the things you maybe wouldn't talk about to anybody else because you'll maybe never see them again. So you can tell them those stories, So I agree with you, Jeff the Bard. When I'm performing for one person or for 300 people, I still am a vehicle, a channel for the story to come through. And if you don't remember it the same way I do, then you have your story and I have my story, and we're all right.
Baruch Hashem. Yep, that's absolutely true. And thank you. Thank you. I love that. And Barry's going to share his particular point of view on this as well, I think. Hi, Barry.
Yes, I am. I just want to say that I agree with what you've said and what Karen said. And one of the things that I think about, especially in terms of personal storytelling, is that, you go by how you remember it. And I like to say reporters report facts, but storytellers tell truths. And so we tell the truth as we remember it, as it was true for us, as it was significant. I have a story that I used to tell, I haven't told it in years, about walking our dog when I was in 10 years old, and our dog was never a very friendly dog, and I was so proud of walking the dog. One day I actually got her and I came running into the house, and I was so proud. Oh, it was that I took the dog's leash off by myself because the dog would never let me do that. But I came running into the house, took the leash off, and I was so proud. I came running into my mother's room, and I came just searching for her, and she had just gotten out of the shower. And there I am holding up the dog's leash, and there's my mother standing there. And she, and at a certain point she heard me tell it, and she was like, that's not what happened. I don't remember that at all. But it's the truth as I remember it. And it's the truth as remembered by a 10-year-old boy with all these conflicting things going on. So that's my 2 cents, another 2 cents.
No, that's well said, Barry. You're going to have to send me some of those quotes so I can kind of steal them from you. Jeff the Bard.
I'm reminded of the classic Akira Kurosawa movie, Rashomon, where there's a murder that takes place and you have 4 different testimonies that are 4 completely different stories. And anybody that's ever criticized for not telling it the exact same way, I just usually tell people, well, this is the version I know, needs to watch Rashomon, because it really drives home. You mentioned it earlier. If you see a wreck, there's going to be 4 or 5 different views of it. What I was taught was that a story is a skeleton, and the skeleton of the story, the bones, are the ultimate truths of the story. That's the essence of the story. And as a bard, I can never, ever change the skeleton. Even the bardic motto is truth against the world. The essential truth of that story you can never change. But the flesh, of the story, that's mine to play with.
Yeah.
That's what you flesh out. That's what you make colorful. That's how you own a story. And I think too often people don't understand that when you tell stories, you need to own the story. You've got to make that story yours. You have to own it.
Yeah, that's so well said. Thank you for that. And Eric's raising his hand.
Yes, excuse me. I appreciate your drawing attention to the idea and practice of performance, which I would call getting into it. And as people have said, it involves visualizing it and reliving it to some extent. Storytelling can also be considered a ritual, a secular ritual perhaps, because in a ritual we do a number of steps in order to get in touch with the real or something very deep. So storytelling can be looked at as and it can be both a ritual and a performance. The two things are not exclusive, but one type of storytelling in some traditional cultures, including here in South India, is that the act of storytelling, the act of narration, is also an act of invocation, because the story about a historical figure or divine figure is told, and at some point maybe someone in the audience or one of the performers feels that the spirit of that that character has entered one's body. So that's really getting into it, or having it get into you. In Tamil Nadu, this is called Sami, when you summon the spirit into your body just by the act of telling the story of that character. So, so there are various ways of getting into it, getting carried away, and bringing a story to life.
I would agree with that. And I don't claim that my way is the right way. I don't claim that it's the only way to tell stories. It's my way of kind of peddling what I do and what I believe. And I think some of the things that we've shared here, I know we're going to run out of time, but some of the things that we shared here can be applied in a whole lot of different contexts, not just the personal narrative storytelling world in which I am immersed. And so I appreciate that commentary that you just made, Eric, very much. Thank you. Jeff DeBart, are you frozen, or do you just not want to talk now? Oh, well, Jeff is frozen. Some of us, including me in particular, have talked a lot. And I'm allowed to talk a lot because this was my workshop. But I'd like to hear from someone who didn't want to jump in, but maybe listening to me ramble on, go, if he can do it, I can do it. Who hasn't spoken, who'd like to speak up? Anybody, just Moira.
Yeah, I love to listen to all this. I just copied some of the comments from the chat because they're so wonderfully to the point. I'm not much of a performer, and what I heard and watched in the last hour shows me how much I'm actually want to go in that direction, not because it has a better effect. It's about what was just said about owning the story. Once I own the story and it gets a real link between me and I'm sure of why I'm telling this story, I think it automatically gets into the performing and the aliveness and improvisation, suddenly catching yourself, oh, I'm telling it completely different than I did the last time when I still had my written words in mind. So I think it's a wonderful process to be alive and authentic, and at the same time watching you. It's a high art. heart, and this is not a contradiction. And that's what I find so wonderful, that there's so much to learn there. Thank you.
I owe you a story that I will send you. I promised you I would. I
I'll be a
haven't-
pain in the neck, don't worry. It took me a long time, but I'll be back to you. Yeah, thank you.
Who else would like to be here? Is there somebody who'd like to try?
I'd like to say something, though I was not here throughout the workshop, but whatever I heard in the last few 10 minutes, when we talk about owning up the story, I also felt sometimes the story owns you. You know, things come out, some things just come out, which you have not even researched for. It happened with me once when I was telling a story, which was rehearsed and practiced very well. And I was doing it in the first person. I became the character. I said few things which were not part of my script. And I went back and I checked and they were true. So I don't know where they came from, the subconscious, but it was a moment that gave me goosebumps later. And I felt that day the story wanted me to speak through the perspective of the story, of the person I was talking about. And I got few insights there. So the story also sometimes owns you up. You may try to own it, but if it doesn't let you, it doesn't.
And Poonam, where did the story come from? It came from inside of you. And
I really don't know.
I know. I think that's where it came from. Fabio, did you want to say something? I see a hand.
Hi, Howard, thank you. I was actually typing.
Oh.
No problem. I can say something. I think I heard your thoughts. You were about to say if somebody wants to tell a story in two different ways. Is that what you're thinking?
That's where I was going. Is there anybody else who would like to volunteer to do that?
Okay, so I heard it well. I can do it. Short one.
Thank you.
So it's a traditional story.
Good.
Once Nasruddin went to a kind of a copyrights officer. How do you say when you invent something new and you're supposed to copyright it? Where would you go?
Patent office in this country.
Huh?
In this country, it would be called the Patent and Trademark Office.
Patent and Trademark Office. That's exactly where he was. He was going to the Patent and Trademark Officer, and he wanted to register a new invent. And the attendant, when he saw the invention Nasruddin had brought to him, he said, "No, sir, sorry, we can't register that." And then Nasruddin used his invention, and he made the attendant disappear. That's the story. Okay, now let's see the second one. If you want to keep listening, or if you want me, the storyteller, to disappear as soon as possible. It's very late here. It's like 1 o'clock. Sorry, I'm in my pajamas. I never told a story like this. I feel so naked, yes, in front of you. But I'll try to become a performance storyteller, not so sleepy. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Excuse me, before you begin, we're scheduled to only have 1 more minute in this session.
Okay,
but
1 minute.
Go ahead and
yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Once upon a time, in the time where people do believe in story, although sometimes they have just 1 minute to tell a story, Nasruddin went to register his new invention, and he went to the patent and trademark officer. He didn't know the name exactly, but he went there, and the attendant saw, and he said, no, sir. Sorry, we can't register impossible inventions. And Nazruddin all of a sudden made the attendant disappear.
Yeah.
And the thing that he wanted to trademark and patent was a disappearing machine?
Probably. You never know.
Hope we got his patent. That's a good machine. I'll say a few last words because and I don't mean to cut anybody short, but I know Eric needs to move on. No matter what kind of a storyteller you are, no matter what kind of stories you tell, be authentic. Be authentic and have fun. When you're authentic, the audience feels it. And if you feel a joy at telling your story, the audience feels it. You're offering a piece of yourself, sharing your humanity. And that's never a bad thing. There's lots more we could talk about and lots more to do, but this is an introduction to storytelling from my piece of the world. And I just want to say to Selena and the few people I know who are still here, Caroline, Nora, someday we should all visit again, and hopefully very soon, next year in Montreal. And I would also say to the people I don't know, it's really an honor for me to get to know you. And it's an honor for me that you came to listen. And I hope you took something from it. And from the bottom of my authentic heart, I really appreciate you very, very much. So thank you. And Eric, thank you too for doing this. I know I'm sometimes difficult for you to deal with, but two ex-New Yorkers, what can I tell you? We know each other. So thank you all, and I will shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard.